So there's a lot of important turning points in civilization as a whole, right? For our species. So we had the consciousness triggering point, right? Separation from the animals, at least in the introspective sense, right? Then you have the agricultural revolution, right? And the breaking up of the tribe, and then the instead of hunter gatherer, now you toil the land, right? Now this brought about property ownership. This brought about the aristocracy, right? Because now you could have armies. Now you can charge taxes, right? Because people need the land to survive. They can't just up and go to another spot, right? This changed dramatically the life that Homo sapien was living. Now, sometime later, you have the Industrial Revolution, right? Bringing about the industrial age, the age of science, reason, right? And that, of course, brings about all sorts of different ideologies and all sorts of exterior influences on the individual, right? So after the world wars, right, that's when things really kicked it up a notch insofar as mass production, right? Because you have geared entire nations toward manufacturing and manufacturing for the sake of creating military in order to embark on the war, right? But now you have all of this capacity. And now what do you do with it that the war is over? So you have to cause a psychological shift within your own population, right? Because we've always lived in a state of scarcity, right? So you wouldn't want to live lavishly, right? You need to set aside food for hard times. But came about this time with the plethora of innovations and resources. Now it was a good thing to spend. It was a good thing to be greedy, right? Now you need the population to be greedy if you ramp up manufacturing, right? Now you have to come up with all sorts of things to fill these homes, right? The nuclear home, a modern house, right? Create a nation of consumers, an entire globe of consumers, right? So you don't miss stuff that you never had. So like when you start getting into comfort, you start getting spoiled, right? You start to think that you deserve everything that you have. And the only reason that we have the very comfortable lives that we do is because people that previously existed lived lives of vast discomfort. And on an even grander level, right? At least in the moral sense, people existing in the same time period as us, but just in a different nation, right? Live in terrible conditions in order to provide us with the conditions we love so much, right? The majority of our stuff is now made overseas, right, by people that are operating under a completely different set of rules. As a species, we need to get past the exploitation of each other, right? Until we do, we're never going anywhere, right? We need to be striving toward something that unifies us instead of dividing us, right? You have the slaves over here taking care of the comfortable over there. And that's the way it's been for quite some time, right? That is basically the imperial model, right? That was the way that Rome functioned. As long as it was expanding, it was able to bring in more slaves, right? But as soon as you reach a point, you collapse within, right? Because spoiled individuals do not like to work for what they want, right? They deserve it. They're entitled to it. And that is where we definitely are in America as a nation, right? This is the way that it's always been for the vast majority of people. They don't understand the intricacies in the world that have brought about their circumstance, right? They don't understand the people that are exploited in order to provide them with trivial comforts, right? And so there's a huge thing psychologically in order to get people just to not pay attention to that, in order to not care about that. And if they do know about it, and if they do care about it, you have to make them feel so small that they believe no matter what, they could never impact it. And then you have a self perpetuating slave master system, right? And that's kind of where they want the whole world to get into. You know, you fill them up with distractions. You distract them and distract them and distract them. You put them into synthetic realities, right? Fictional structures of existence, right? And that's what we have with language and nations and laws and all of these things, right? The economic system, the just the way that we live in multiple ways, right? We don't just live in the natural world, right? We set up synthesized realities that we also function within, right? Or don't function within, right? But the more and more you pull yourself out of reality and into this fantasy, the more you lose a grasp on how the fantasy is created and why it is erected, right? You are no longer in control. Right? And just like our ancestors who gave up foraging to start growing, right? It happened incrementally, right? They lost touch with nature. They wanted to dominate nature, and in turn, nature dominated them, right? No, we didn't domesticate plants, right? Plants domesticated us. Wheat and corn, all of the other singular starches that we started growing and harvesting, right? They required work. It required turmoil. It required more children, right, to work. Not only that, since you have more children, now you're not breastfeeding as long. Now they're eating singular starches, and you have all sorts of illnesses. Not to mention the close proximity with animals, right? So the viruses are able to jump species, creating all sorts of issues. And then you have more densely packed population, but it happens incrementally. So nobody was able to see the transitions, right? You think about the difference in the last 100 years, how many things have been incrementally changed, right? The world that we grew up in was different than the world my son is growing up in, right? And I'm only 21 years older than him. But we can say that definitively. If you go back 500 years, 21-year difference really don't make that big of a difference. Now, yeah, sure, nations rose and fell, and there were wars and politics and all this other calamity. But the world that they day to day lived in did not rapidly change within a 21-year spectrum. We are in the velocipedic age. We have instant communication, right? We have unlimited information. We actually have the problem of too much information. We have to filter through all of it in order to figure out what is true and what is not, right? For the vast majority of time, the majority of people who have existed were not able to read, right? More people have lived and died not understanding written language than have lived and died understanding it. And that's not even getting into arithmetic or physics in chemistry, or any of the other great known things that our species knows now that individuals typically don't, but as a whole, the vast majority never did. So, as we go from one belief system to another belief system, these are the dangerous points, right? Transitional periods. That's where things are a little bit touch and go, right? And right now, we're in a very bad place as a species. The result of instant communication and being inundated with all sorts of information, be it valid or invalid, the majority is invalid. And then the denseness in which we live and the complete disconnect from nature and natural law, right? We have a massive disconnect from moral law, right? We do not have a way to gauge our morality, right? Because everything is discardable. It's not the same people in the village or in the tribe that you were going to know your entire life. You can pick up and move, go find new people, go to a new place, right? So you don't have that same level of loyalty, that same level of commitment to the individuals around you, right? How many people come from broken homes where even the family bond that they are supposed to uphold has been broken, usually at a young age or at some point in your adolescence, right? Leaving a detrimental impact on your relationship to other people. And then, not to mention, being packed into cities where you see thousands of people every day and interact with maybe a handful, right? This gives you a coldness, right? We're aware of the fact that there are so many other people. We are aware of how small we are, right? How insignificant we feel compared to models and movie stars and athletes and whatever, right? Psychologically, you're in a village as a 15-year-old boy and you only know 100 people your whole life. That's all you've known. A lot of the men are old, some of the men are too young, some of the men are ugly, right? You would assume that you're good looking, or you would assume that you're pretty fast, or you're pretty smart, or you're pretty funny, right? And there's 100 people. So chances are you're somewhere decent in there, right? Or the same thing with a young woman, right? She's young and vibrant, beautiful, comparing herself to the old ladies, comparing herself to the little girls, you know? But nowadays, 15, 16-year-olds, they're not comparing themselves to a very small group of people, right? They're comparing themselves to people that have been cycled out of the millions, right? So, models, actors, athletes, there's a lot of people competing for those top spots, right? And they get filtered out as things go. You know, you'll get filtered out in high school, or you'll get filtered out in college, or you'll get filtered out in trying to get into the pros, right? So there's thousands of people competing to be in this very small spectrum. And then that small spectrum is elevated to the point where everybody can see and compare themselves to that, right? But it's not a small test subject, right? There's a very large group of people that are being chosen from that, and then the best of those people come through, right? So it's another way of making you feel small, right? And then like the disconnection from death that we have. It's it's done comically in action movies, or it's thrilling, or there's no real motion attached to it, right? And then we're disconnected from it from hospitals and all of these other things. Like the reason that you would bring flowers to a funeral is because funerals used to be held in the home, where the person died, where the body was kept, right? You have a decomposing corpse that was your family member in your living room so everyone can come and pay their respects. And some people are traveling for days to get to you, right? So you bring flowers to help offset the odor, right? It used to be a very visceral connection. You would have to kill your own food. You would have to process it. you know? Even battle in itself, it was close. It was personal. There is very little that is personal now, but that's what happens when blind consumption is cultivated in mass. Not only that, but it is rewarded. So there's definitely a lot to say about that. But we need another revolution, right? And it needs to be one of truth. And it needs to be one of discernment, goals, aspirations. Right? Because we're really lost our way as a species, just in general. You see where the direction we've headed over the past century. There are a lot of things to be optimistic about, and there's a lot of things to be weary about. I'm hoping for the best, and I wish you the best. We got more in common with each other than those that want us to fight. You know, just some food for thought.